I don't know what to call this block because we don't do blocks anymore, but I guess I'll just call it the double feature block of Midnight Hunt and Crimson Vow, which is a mixed bag. They're weird sets to me.
I enjoy that you think it's a mixed bag when, like, I feel like most people are like, yeah, it was trash.
I don't think ending on Crimson Vow did them any favors.
No, God, no.
I think Midnight Hunt is a considerably stronger set than Crimson Vow. Midnight Hunt was the quote-unquote werewolf set, and Crimson Vow was the quote-unquote vampire set.
Okay.
Despite neither set really being either of those things.
Yeah, I don't remember which one's which, really, because, like, they didn't do a great job of hitting those tropes for the werewolves and vampires of, like, it's a set around them.
No, and it's a weird block to me, because unlike the other two Innistrad sets that very much felt like top-down designs, these are, like, bottom-up mechanic-first designs.
Yeah.
Where I think there's really solid mechanics for each of the tribes, with the exception of blood tokens. Those
are trash.
As much as I love madness and discard matters type stuff, it just doesn't get there.
Yeah, even in that kind of aspect, blood tokens are still trash.
It's interesting seeing two sets set on Innistrad that don't have a cohesive theme. I think Midnight Hunt is a better set to me because it feels the closest to having some kind of theme to it. So I'm going to go real horror nerd for a second.
Yeah.
So there's this subgenre of horror that's called folk horror, which was like big in the 60s and 70s.
Okay.
The original Wicker Man, not the Nicolas Cage version, is kind of a good example of like a classic folk horror movie. If anybody has seen Midsummer, that's kind of like a modern version of a folk horror movie where folk horror kind of revolves largely around like elements of like witchcraft and paganism, but not like supernatural witchcraft or paganism. It's like weird kind of hippie cults that are out in the woods that are like sacrificing people to like grow their crops, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Midnight Hunt kind of has a little bit of a vibe of that. You know, you've got the whole coven mechanic, and you've got, you know, I think there's a card, I don't run it, I think it's called like Join the Dance. It's like a green-white card where there's like some cultists that are like dancing around an effigy. You know, you've kind of got vibes of that. A lot of the cards have like pumpkins and like fall produce in the art where it kind of has that like autumnal kind of vibe to it.
Yeah.
That kind of feels a little bit more cohesive and like thematic to me. I think mechanically that set is pretty good, especially if you're looking at like prior Innistrad sets. A lot of things play really well. You know, I know you and Brad were rightfully very down on Decayed for like an average cube.
Yeah.
As you should be, rightfully. But, you know, if you're someone who has a lot of cards that want morbid triggers, or if you're really, really pushing the kind of aristocrat thing where death triggers matter, those tokens are like a slam dunk. You know, if you don't think of them as creatures, if you think of them as a resource to get a death trigger, they're pretty good.
Right.
Giving spirits a way to play with the graveyard and Disturbed, I thought was a slam dunk.
Yeah. I forgot about Disturb. That's a neat one.
It's a really cool one, and like that was something with my cube that I always struggled with, is it was really graveyard centric, but I had this one tribe and spirits that just didn't really care about the graveyard in any way, but now they can.
Yeah, it was just like a mid-range, kind of control-y, kind of grindy.
Yeah, but now I can tie it into like the central cohesive theme of the cube in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that is nice.
Werewolves, controversial.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what are your thoughts on the werewolves mechanically? Especially because, like, I mean, if you're playing all the werewolves,
yeah,
they're not the same.
I'm conflicted. I think a lot of people with cubes similar to mine are as well.
Yeah.
When I kind of look around and click around the cube map and I look at what other people that are kind of in my little spooky island of like Innistrad and horror cubes are looking at, people are doing a lot of different things.
Yeah.
I think Daybound and Nightbound is a really interesting design space. I wish it got pushed further to where, you know, Midnight Hunt, there are non-werewolf cards that care about day and night that do some interesting stuff with it. Crimson Vow has none of that. It's just on werewolves. It's just the werewolf mechanic.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, there's only a dozen or so Daybound, Nightbound cards.
if even. I'm not even sure if it goes that far outside of the werewolves, but I think it's a cool mechanic.
It is. I like the mechanic. It is cleaner for a lot of reasons.
Absolutely. It's cleaner, it's stronger.
Yeah, it definitely can be. And it's just one of those, like, I was interested to hear your thoughts on that, because, like, the old werewolves are different.
They are. So I am aware of the fact that my cube is already very complicated because it's graveyard-centric, there's weird self-mill decks, delirium decks need to be really mindful of drafting artifacts and enchantments and weird card types. I didn't want to add complexity to it by having either two types of werewolves that don't play the same way, which could very easily confuse people or lead to misplays, or by then errataing old wolves.
Okay.
So I made the decision to just move entirely to daybound and nightbound wolves because I thought on the whole they were significantly stronger than the old werewolves.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I don't feel like I'm losing much by tossing the old werewolves out of the cube. There are a handful of cards that I miss, but on the whole, most of them sucked.
Yeah, and like even the ones that were good were like replaceable kind of things, where it's like, yeah, it's probably better than what you're replacing with, but
right,
it's fine. Like, just to make things a little bit easier, because yeah, drafting your cube, there are definitely a lot of synergy things that you have to keep in mind. So
100%.
But okay, we can go back to some more of like the theme and why Crimson Vow sucked thematically.
So that's a good segue. So then you get to Crimson Vow, and you kind of drop that whole like autumnal thing for like Vampire Wedding, which, being a huge horror nerd, I don't even know how you design a set around Vampire Wedding. Like, that's not a super rich horror trope to dig into. It's like, okay, you can kind of go into like that kind of cheesy, like gothic baroque Anne Ricey kind of like vampire, but I don't know how compelling that's gonna be. I don't know how you like make a mechanic around that, which is why I think we got blood tokens, which
yeah,
I still don't really even understand from a flavor perspective why a blood token leads to a rummage. I don't understand that. I don't get what is like flavorfully happening when you sacrifice a blood token and why you are discarding a card and drawing a card. I don't get what that represents,
Yeah, I kind of understand, like, you get an artifact and, like, you sacrifice it to do a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of makes sense because, like, thematically in the set, you want to have the ability to discard things, but at the same time, you don't want it to just be a downside, so you have to give it something else. But, like, honestly, it is actually a complicated thing to figure out in the set for them, but they didn't figure it out.
Yeah, it doesn't feel fully baked.
No.
And then I feel like you kind of have a little bit of the Eldritch Moon problem again, where, like, you've got some vampires at the wedding, and then you have various members of the Gatewatch who crash the wedding for a story reason that I don't fully understand. I don't know why they cared. Yeah, it's like, all right, I kind of got Midnight Hunt. You got this, like, weird vampire dude who's trying to take over the pack, and he wants to plunge Innistrad into forever midnight. I get that.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Then Olivia shows up and, like, lets that happen to have a wedding? I don't know. I lost the thread, And we're back to, Gideon's dead, so he's not the one punching the monsters in the face. Now it's Chandra and Kaya. And, like, I don't know.
Yeah, and, like, it's one of those that, like, going back to, like, as the consumer, as the player, like, what's the expectation that's actually happening here? And, like, I don't know, dude. I thought it was a vampire thing.
Right, and I'm glad that's the words you used, because I feel the biggest problem with these sets was I feel like Wizards really just did not manage people's expectations well. The first we heard of these sets were the code names, werewolf and vampire. So of course people think, oh cool, we're going to get a werewolf set and we're going to get a vampire set.
Yeah.
Then we find out about Double Feature, and we see artwork from it where it's black and white, and it looks like it's done up like an old Universal Monsters poster. So we're thinking, cool, we're going to get like creature features, cinematic horror type stuff.
Yeah, dude, I completely forgot about that until you just brought that up. And I remember thinking that same, I was like, oh man, this is going to be awesome. They're going to hit all of those, like, the fun movie aspects of, like, the creature type stuff, and it's going to be great.
Yeah, it's like we're going to get like that weird campy thing. We're going to get like a Bride of Frankenstein, and we're going to get a blob. We did get a blob, so that's a bad example because we did get a blob.
Yeah, but like it did not go to the expectation.
We didn't get that. And then I remember watching like the reveal event for Midnight Hunt, and at the end of it, they hadn't spoiled a single werewolf. And I was like, oh
no.
that's not good. They didn't show us a single werewolf in the werewolf set. I wonder why that is. And then we find out that the werewolf set's making these new werewolves that don't play with the old ones. Kind of a blunder. Like, I think by virtue of these being newer sets, they're mechanically really solid, and they make up a lot of my cube because we're in the power creep era and they're good cards.
Yeah.
Mechanically, there were things where I'm like, oh, this is super cool. Like, this will feed into madness decks. You know, there was a lot of cool stuff that I was happy about having the cube that I have, but I can totally understand how people who just wanted to draft some good spooky fun last October were disappointed with it.
Okay, so, I mean, that kind of rounds out, like, the Innistrad.
Yeah.
And without any further ado, let's just jump into the outro.